Back to Life by James McDowell. Read for you by Mason McDowell. The Nebraska sandhills were lunar-like in appearance, each moonlit bluff forging an unearthly spectacle against the violet pre-dawn sky. It could have passed for Apollo footage, but Charlie Hudson wasn't awake enough to notice. On the road for nearly 10 straight hours, his eyelids were feeling as if they were made of lead, and his chin wanted to attach itself to his chest. He was now hunched over the wheel, preoccupied with one simple objective: to find an exit. He needed coffee and he needed fuel, and if he had any hopes of getting either, he needed to avert his eyes from the dashed center line, appearing and disappearing with the rhythm of a hypnotist's watch fob, slowly nibbling away at his consciousness. It pained him to think that Larry might have been right. "That's insane," his boss had told him. "There's no way that piece of rusted plumbing you call a car is going to haul all your crap 2,000 miles. Flights are cheap these days. You can hire an 18-wheeler to ship back what won't fit on the plane. Who knows?" He laughed. "You might even live to tell about it." Larry was an asshole, but pretty smart, and very good at calculating odds. Charlie didn't care. For Charlie, planning for missteps took all the adventure out of life. He liked taking chances, and this was the summer to do it. Manhattan had been unusually hot. There had been a blackout, a transit strike, and even a garbage strike. The usual annoyances were magnified to the extent that all he could think about was getting the hell out. He didn't care about the odds. At 35, he wanted to throw caution to the wind, take his rusted plumbing for a nice long drive on the open highway, and live a little. With 4 vacation days coming, he figured he could leave Friday evening, drive straight through to Chicago, stay a night, and then on to Denver. No stops, except for gas and coffee. Why not? He had driven it half a dozen times in his 20s, and several of those in one shot. Getting there would be half the fun. And the other half would be getting back by the following Friday to watch Larry eat his words. Traffic was light when he set out, and he made good time. With every mile he put between himself and New York City, there was a reawakening of his soul. The anguish of the breakup with his fiancée, Marion, was replaced by a wistful yearning to revisit his favorite haunts, walk through his old house, and see his brother Tom again. This nostalgic rebirth gave him a heavy foot, and he arrived in Chicago ahead of schedule. There he made the bold decision to continue on to Iowa City, where he rented a small bungalow at the Belmont Motel. It had a lumpy bed, understuffed pillows, and a flashing green neon sign that set a Hitchcock tone to his dingy accommodations. Normally it would have kept him awake, but the scent of pines just outside the window over his bed more than made up for it, and he slept better than he had in 10 years since moving to New York. Leaving the Belmont, he felt refreshed, but by Sunday evening was beginning to feel the residual aftermath of pushing himself so hard on the front side of the trip. Making matters worse, the interstate, no longer bound by the contours of the hills and valleys of the eastern part of the state, had straightened considerably. He was now a prisoner of the narcotic effects of Nebraska's amber waves of grain, so that by the time he reached the sandhills, he felt lucky to be not just awake, but alive. Charlie's chin dropped, and the car swerved. Quickly jerking his head upright, he popped open a wing window to let humid air blow directly into his face. Without caffeine, Charlie had to keep pulling rabbits out of hats to fight the sedative effect of the highway, but he was running out of rabbits. He eased up on the accelerator. On a bluff to his right, a large billboard displaying a preposterously jolly waitress holding a cup of steaming hot coffee glowed in the darkness. It read, "Endicott Diner. Pumps open 24 hours. 5 miles. Charlie wasn't religious, but he praised the Lord anyway and sent his rusty plumbing with great dispatch into the waning darkness. It had only been a couple of miles when, in his mirror, a glimmer of light caught his eye. It was the first rays of the sun peeking over the horizon. A brilliant radiance began to flood the barren landscape and paint the September sky crimson. Far in the distance, a grain silo and barn were etched with startling clarity against the dazzling backdrop. It comforted him. It was the kind of landscape he had grown up with. He sighed as it jogged a childhood memory of him and his brother Tom. They were playing with a marble track they had built with garden hoses at their house on Jefferson Street. It was a pristine, clear summer day, and the sun was shining brightly. Tom had just let the first marble go. Charlie laughed as Tom jumped up and down excitedly, twisting and bending his torso, urging the marble to stay on the track as it raced along the 2 parallel lengths of hose toward a banked curve. A marble shot off the track. "Dang it!" Tom exclaimed. The airborne object headed straight toward Charlie. He ducked, letting it fly over his head and ping off the wheelbarrow behind him. But then there was another, and another, until the deafening roar of marbles hammering the wheelbarrow merged with the roar of loose gravel from the shoulder of the road, pounding the door panel of his car. Charlie awakened in a panic and bolted upright. Instantly, his eyes were wide and adrenaline pumped through his veins as he saw he was headed for a deep ravine. Grasping the steering wheel, he jerked it left. The tires screeched and the car careened uncontrollably out of his lane and into the path of a tractor-trailer coming up fast from behind. There was a blast from the semi, and Charlie yanked the car back in the other direction, never seeing the pickup in front of him. Before he could hit the brakes, there was a momentous impact that threw him violently into the steering wheel. The 2 vehicles locked, then skidded and weaved in tandem, finally coming to rest on the right shoulder of the highway. In an instant, the fury and turbulence of the collision ended, replaced by the soft morning music of a sparrow from a nearby fence post. Charlie's heart continued to pound as he laid back against the seat, breathing deeply to calm himself. From his open wing, a faint breeze carried the acrid smell of burned rubber, underscored by a distinct hissing sound. Charlie heard a truck door slam, pulled himself to an upright position, and peered over the steering wheel. In front of his car was a green pickup, a farm vehicle loaded with 6 egg crates and a chicken coop that poked above the tailgate. A short, stocky woman, wearing faded blue overalls and a plaid shirt, ambled toward his car. Charlie swallowed hard, pushed his door open, and climbed out to meet her. By the time he reached the front of his car, she was already crouched down, surveying the damage. He was about to ask if she was all right when he heard her husky voice. "You been drinking, honey?" she muttered without looking up. "Not exactly. It was more that His voice trailed off as he watched her poke her head into the gash of his car's grill. She had a ruddy complexion, and though her manner was abrupt, he sensed something kind and maternal about her. The bumper of his car had slid under the bumper of the pickup, which was buried deep into his car's grill. Green fluid was dripping onto the pavement, and tiny wisps of steam rose from underneath his hood. There was no doubt his car's radiator had been punctured. "I fell asleep," he said. She seemed not to hear him as she pulled her head out. "We got to get us unhitched." Then she kneeled on the ground, flipped over, and slid herself under the wreckage. The sun had now completely eclipsed the horizon and was beating down on a large weathered billboard planted in scrubby brush further up the highway. Pasted on it was the same image he had seen a few miles back, that of the jolly waitress holding a cup of coffee. She looked like his Aunt Edna, a real busybody, always snooping. He wondered if she was checking up on him. His eyes moved down the interstate to what was the Endicott Diner, a sprawling truck stop in the middle of nowhere. A giant semi roared by, rumbling the pavement beneath his feet and creating a tagging gust of wind that rocked his car. He turned back toward the woman. "I suppose you'll want to get a trooper. I can call from the diner up the road if you'd like." She didn't answer as she shimmied out from under the vehicles, stood up, and faced him. "You got a ruptured radiator. Slow leak, though. How far you going?" "Denver," he replied. "That's a ways. Better make sure you got antifreeze on board. And keep your eye on the temp gauge. Now come on," she said. "Give me a hand." Then she yelled in the direction of the cab. "Hey, Sam, come on over here." He looked up, not realizing she had a passenger. It certainly didn't look like a Sam. She was young, maybe late 20s, he figured. The passenger door opened and he watched her get out. The older woman snatched a crowbar from the back of the pickup. "Go take your car out of gear, then you and Sam can bounce the back of the truck while I pry 'em apart." Charlie walked back to his car and slipped it into neutral. When he returned, the old woman was giving instructions to Sam. Although the young girl wore overalls like the older woman, hers hung loosely on her slim frame, her shoulder-length blonde hair hiding her profile as she nodded in agreement. Charlie hoisted himself up on the bumper and, turning to the girl, offered his hand. The girl accepted and pulled herself onto the bumper. "Thanks," she said, smiling and locking eyes with Charlie. Charlie froze, and a chill ran up his spine. She was beautiful, but that's not what unnerved him. Her face was strangely familiar. She had a quirky dimple around her mouth, and he swore he had seen her before. The girl turned away, but Charlie continued to stare in her direction, his brain in a desperate struggle to place her. At once the spell was broken by the husky voice of the older woman. "Okay, start your bouncing," she yelled. The girl immediately began to jump up and down. Charlie quickly joined in, tentatively at first, trying to synchronize his movement with the girl's, and then with more gusto once they were together. The truck started to rock. He heard the twisting and popping of metal until, suddenly, there was a loud bang. Charlie felt the truck move as he heard a hearty exclamation. "I'll teach you!" A moment later, the old woman emerged from under the freed vehicles, a look of victory on her grease-smudged face. She hurled the crowbar into the bed of the pickup and waddled back to the cab. "Come on, Sam, we're going to be late," she shouted. When Charlie turned around, the girl was hurrying back to the cab. He wanted another glimpse of her face, but she had already opened the passenger door and slid in, so he never got the chance. The truck started and Charlie jumped to the ground. As it idled, he walked around to the cab to offer his apologies to the woman, but before he could get there, she turned with an admonishing look. "You need to get some coffee in your gut, honey. You could have killed somebody." Then she checked her mirror and roared off down the freeway. Charlie watched the pickup until it became nothing more than a tiny green dot and then vanished on the horizon. Before trying to start his car, Charlie gave it a quick inspection. The front end looked worse than he remembered. It was a mess of twisted metal, and he could see that a significant amount of antifreeze had leaked out. He popped the hood. There was still clearance between the fan and the radiator. Even so, the damage was significant enough that the insurance company would likely consider it totaled. Not a problem, he thought. He was pretty sure the insurance company would have considered it totaled before he had the accident. Charlie climbed behind the wheel and drove up the interstate to the Endicott Diner. For the most part, it was a truck stop consisting of two brown modular structures connected by a canopied breezeway. One building was a convenience store that peddled food on the fly and ran the pumps, while the other was an actual diner. When Charlie drove into the lot, he parked closest to the diner. A half-dozen pickups and cars were already there, and further down, towards the pumps, a double row of 18-wheelers. Charlie got out of his car and went into the diner. It was a cozy little place with tables and a long counter with a dozen bright red vinyl revolving stools. Toward the far end, two of the stools were already occupied. One by a stocky, middle-aged man wearing a t-shirt and a weathered, sunburned face. He was obviously a regular, as he joked with a uniformed waitress who worked behind the counter. Sitting to his immediate right was a thinner man wearing a baseball cap, energetically stuffing his face and laughing along. Charlie took the third stool in from the cash register and grabbed a menu from a wire caddy. He opened the menu and scanned it, whistling absently as he read. Moments later, the waitress appeared with a steaming pot of fresh coffee. She pulled a worn, checkered rag from her pocket and wiped the counter in front of him. "Coffee?" she asked. "Just made it." Charlie nodded. "Sure, thanks." The waitress was in her 30s, dark hair with sharp ethnic features that seemed out of place in rural Nebraska. He watched her well-rehearsed movements as she quickly produced a cup and saucer from under the counter, placed it in front of him, and filled it with coffee. She then grabbed a hinged-top stainless steel canister of cream, checked its contents, and slid it within his reach. "Let me know when you're ready to order," she said. "Will do," Charlie nodded pleasantly, and returned his eyes to the menu, continuing to whistle softly to himself. He was trying to decide if he wanted bacon with his eggs when he noticed, over the top of his menu, the waitress was still there, staring at him. "Charles Hunter, right?" she asked. Puzzled, Charlie responded, "The name's Hudson." "No, it's definitely Hunter. I should know. I did a paper on him in college." She looked off, tapping her chin. "Now what tune is that?" A voice from the kitchen rang out. "Valerie, table 6! "Think about what you want. I'll be right back," she said. Charlie was baffled. Initially, he thought she might be addressing him and just got his name wrong. But clearly she meant Charles Hunter. She had even written a paper on the guy. And what did a tune have to do with any of it? He said the name again to himself. Charles Hunter. It rang a bell. A minute later, Valerie was back. Pulling a pad from her apron and a pencil from behind her ear, she asked, "So what would you like?" Clarity, he wanted to say, but was too tired and hungry. He briefly poked his nose into the menu and then looked up. "How about a couple of eggs over medium and home fries?" "Sausage? Bacon?" she asked. "No thanks. You got rye toast?" "Yes, we do." She made some scribbles on the pad, then yelled to the kitchen. "Number 3, over medium, whiskey down." Charlie dashed out to the breezeway and bought the morning paper. By the time he returned, his breakfast was waiting. He made it vanish as quickly as it appeared. While sipping his coffee and casually thumbing through the morning paper, the waitress returned. "Anything else?" she asked. "Just the damages." As she totaled his check, she said, "I'm going to think of it and get back to you." With a full stomach, he was now ready for some clarity. "Think of what?" he asked. She looked up, surprised he didn't know. "The song you were whistling earlier. Can't place it right now, but it's one of my favorite rags. Except, of course," pulling the checkered cloth from her apron, "this one." She stuffed the dish rag back in her apron, tore his check from her pad, and slapped it down in front of him. A voice from the kitchen yelled, "Valerie!" Yeah, she yelled back, and was gone. Charlie shielded his eyes from the hot sun as he walked across the parking lot to his car. Before getting in, he checked under the front bumper and noticed a sizable green pool of antifreeze had formed. It seemed to be a slower leak now, but the car wasn't running. Once the car warmed up and the coolant was under pressure, he was sure it would be worse. He made a mental note to grab a gallon, then he pulled his car around to the gas pumps. As he filled up, he caught himself whistling again. He was sure it was the same melody the waitress heard him whistling, the one she called a rag. What was it? And who the hell was Charles Hunter? A tiny, freckle-faced girl with pigtails pressed her nose up against the window of a nearby car and stared at him impassively. He stared back, deadpan for a moment, and then, without warning, made the funniest face he could think of. She smiled, and with a sudden movement that sent her pigtails flying, turned away. He watched the back of her head, waiting for her to turn around so he could put on the same silly face that amused her. But as he waited, his thoughts reverted to the tune, and an unsettling feeling overtook him. The tiny girl had turned back to look at him, but he was staring through her now, his mind far away. All he saw was the young woman in the green pickup. He swore he knew her. The clunk from the gas dispenser trigger roused him from his trance, and his eyes once again focused on the freckled girl, her tongue sticking out and her eyes crossed. When he went to the cashier to pay, he grabbed a gallon of antifreeze and a large coffee to go. From experience, he discovered the large size would fill his thermos perfectly. Before he left, he took a quick sip and grimaced. He double-checked the seal on the bottle of antifreeze, making sure he hadn't sipped from the wrong container. Charlie's dashboard clock read 10:30 when he passed a road sign with the words, "Commerce City, 10 miles. As traffic whizzed around him, he had all but forgotten about Sam, the elusive tune, and the freckle-faced girl. He now shared the road with a stampede of frenzied, impatient drivers. They were cutting in and out and speeding by him, as if in a great race to nowhere. At first, the onslaught didn't make sense, until he realized he never made the time zone adjustment to his clock, and that he was exactly 2 hours ahead. For Coloradans, it was morning rush hour. A light rain had begun to fall, and through the tiny droplets on his windshield, he could barely make out the distant Denver skyline. It was partially obscured by a long strip of brown smog, which hung menacingly over the downtown section. To the west, the Rocky Mountain foothills provided a backdrop for a huge suburban construction project that was underway. Only a few hundred feet from the interstate, giant cranes loomed in heavy construction vehicles weaved among an army of orange-helmeted workers. To the east of the interstate, a finished version had been copied and pasted incongruously onto the landscape. Dozens of new homes now stood, complete with paved driveways and irrigated lawns, where, a mere 2 years earlier, there was only flat grazing land and barbed wire fences. At least, that's how he remembered it the last time he'd visited. Then, he had come out to say goodbye to his terminally ill father. A year before that, it was to attend his mother's funeral. How quietly, but quickly, time marched forward, he thought. Steadying the wheel with his knees, Charlie adjusted his dash clock. The Hudson home was situated in the Washington Park section of Denver. It was not unlike many of the other houses on Jefferson Street, a red brick Tudor with a clay tile roof. 2 large birch trees framed the house on both sides and shaded much of the lot. A 1-stall garage and driveway, added in the 50s, crowded the northernmost property line. It was Tom's house now. Charlie decided not to pull in the driveway, but instead parked his car on the street. Knowing his radiator was still leaking fluid, he figured it would be better to let it drip on the street than in the driveway. Besides, Tom's truck was likely in the garage and he didn't want to block him in. The rain had stopped now, and the sun was making brief appearances through the rapidly dissipating clouds. The sky seemed to be in motion. Charlie got out and stretched. He made a quick survey of the yard as he walked to the front door of the house. Since his last visit, it had fallen into woeful disrepair. The concrete walk that led to the front door was now cracked and had buckled in several places, and the evergreen shrubs that hugged the foundation, once lush and well-tended, were now twiggy and overgrown. Charlie rang the bell twice and waited. Realizing no one was home, he reached behind the mailbox, withdrew a small brass key, and let himself in. From the minute he entered, it was clear his brother had begun making good on his promise to fix up the place. The carpets had been ripped up, furniture covered with drop cloths and moved away from the walls, and a distinct odor of latex paint hovered in the air. It was not the home he remembered. In the living room, faded paint marked where his grandfather's violin used to hang, and on the opposite wall leading to the dining room, where he expected to see a knick-knack shelf with his dad's bowling trophy and his model airplane, only bracket holes remained. On the dining room table, next to a putty knife, was a note. Charlie. Had to step out. Be back soon. Tom. Charlie smiled and began moseying about the house. In the living room, he noticed a large paint-splattered cloth covering various items. Pinned to it was a piece of paper with the words, Charlie's Stuff. He took a quick peek under the cloth. It was his upright piano, 6 boxes stacked on the piano bench, his tools, and some familiar-looking furniture. He was just putting the cloth back down when he heard the front door latch. It made him jump. "Hello? Charlie?" the voice asked. It was unmistakably Tom's. Charlie deepened his voice, and in his late father's stern manner said, "When are you going to learn to clean up your tools when you're done with them, Tommy?" Tom emerged from the foyer holding a small brown bag, hair sticking out every which way, with a large smudge of spackle across his forehead. He was grinning from ear to ear when he said, "Charlie, you son of a monkey, that was good. Sounded just like him." Both arms were sticking out, and Charlie reached out to accept his brother's embrace. It had been 2 years since they'd seen each other. Charlie gave Tom a hug and a vigorous pat between the shoulder blades, and then stepped back to get a good look at him. "Tom, you're looking, Well, he stopped and began picking pieces of debris out of his hair. I know. Hey, if you're going to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, Tom said. Yeah, but you're not supposed to put them in your hair, Charlie added. Au contraire, Tom laughed. Protein keeps the roots healthy. They laughed. Tom then motioned around the room. So, feast your eyes. I give you my omelet. Charlie scanned the room. Quite a tour de force. Did you enlist chickens to help? Tom smiled. I know it's a mess right now, but somebody's got to do it. Since I'm the landlord without a pot to piss in, he sang out in his best Italian baritone. It's gotta be me! Well, Charlie to the rescue, dear old inferior decorator brother of mine. When's 0 hour? He looked back at Tom. The tenants move in next week. He paused, then spoke with slight trepidation. Say, Charlie, you really serious about helping? Absolutely, Charlie assured him. But I gotta leave time to take care of a few things. Got a busted radiator. Yeah, I saw your car out there. What the hell happened? Fender bender someplace in the middle of Nebraska. Fender bender? You call that a fender bender? Yeah, I know it looks bad. Pretty sure it's just the radiator, though. I'm taking it over to CJ's tomorrow. I'm sure he can fix it. If he can, it ain't broken, Tom quipped. Then let's see. I gotta pack up my stuff. Seeing how much is there, it shouldn't take too long. I gotta rent a U-Haul trailer, hitch it up, bring it over here and load it. Piano won't be fun. Nope, it's a heavy sucker, Tom said. My big toe will never forget, Charlie added. Nor will those neighbors in the next county you woke from a sound sleep. And now that you mention sleep, I was hoping to grab some Z's. I've been driving since... His voice trailed off as he saw hope drain from Tom's face. Yeah, you must be whipped after that trip, Tom said, trying to cover his disappointment. Somehow it wasn't convincing. Although he knew his brother was certainly entitled to a good night's rest after the lengthy trip, he had to meet his deadline and couldn't hide it. Tom turned and began walking into the other room. Charlie scratched his head and sighed. Wait, Tom, the more I think about it, he made some calculations in his head. I'll be able to help you tonight, and tomorrow afternoon. I just need the morning to take care of the car and the trailer. Unfortunately, that's all I can offer, though. I gotta be back at work by Friday morning, or Larry will dock me. Tom gave Charlie a bear hug his chiropractor would have been proud of. Charlie followed Tom into the dining room while Tom continued into the kitchen. Surveying the surroundings, Charlie asked, So, where do we start? How about... Tom yelled from the kitchen. Then suddenly he was in the dining room holding a large pizza. We start here. You hungry? I could eat the spackle off your forehead. Tom and Charlie consumed the entire pizza within minutes, then shared old stories as they drank beer and painted. For most of the afternoon, Tom was on a ladder rolling the ceiling, while Charlie was down below taking care of the brushwork. By evening, both exhausted, they worked quietly, saying little. As Charlie was finishing up the baseboard on one of the walls, he began to whistle softly to himself. He was concentrating on a baseboard detail, trying to keep a clean edge against the floor, when he heard Tom whistling along. There was that tune again, he thought. Listening intently, he paused, trying to place it. Hey, Tom? What's that you're whistling? Charlie interrupted. Tom stopped rolling. I'm not sure. Maybe one of those songs you used to play when you were taking piano from, what's his face? You know, the goofy guy with a big butt. Tom chuckled and went back to rolling the ceiling. Charlie wasn't in a frame of mind for jokes. His brain was absorbed in what was quickly becoming an obsession. Tom was right. It did seem like one of the old songs he used to play. And recalling the image of the waitress dangling a dish rag in front of him, it suddenly clicked. It was a ragtime song he whistled, probably one of his lessons. But what was it? It was on the tip of his tongue. Suddenly he was struck by a vision of the girl with the quirky mouth. But, strangely, now she was younger, with pigtails, like the freckle-faced girl at the pumps. A booming voice interrupted his reverie. Earth to Charlie! Holy shit, man! You're dripping paint all over the floor! Tom shot down the ladder and snatched the brush from Charlie's hand. Geez, Charlie, what's up with you? Sorry, Tom. Charlie shook his head, trying to reacquaint himself with reality. Guess I was daydreaming. I guess so. Tom handed Charlie a rag, and they both began wiping up the mess. Too many hours on the road is what it is, said Tom. The highway can do that to you. I shouldn't have asked you to work. You need some rest. I could use some myself. Tom and Charlie cleaned up the brushes, put the paint away, and then said good night. Tom retired to an upstairs bedroom while Charlie made up a sofa in the living room. Using one of the cleaner drop cloths as a blanket and his old Boy Scout sleeping bag as a pillow, he fashioned a fairly comfortable bed. He pulled the cloth up to his chin and mentally ran through all he had to accomplish the following day. It was formidable. Even without the hassle of dealing with his busted radiator, he'd be lucky to get it all done. But one thing was for certain. None of it was remotely possible if he didn't get some shut-eye. Charlie gave his sleeping bag a couple of good punches, switched off the table lamp, pulled the drop cloth over his head, and closed his eyes to a softly ticking clock on the mantel. A minute later, he had drifted off into a recurring dream that he hadn't had since his childhood. As always, it started pleasantly. He was 13. It was a warm, sunny day, and he was playing on his swing set in the backyard. As he leaned back, closing his eyes and feeling the dry air blow across his face, he became suddenly aware of a voice calling out to him. It was his mother. It was time for his piano lesson. At first, he felt excited and couldn't wait to go. He ran inside, grabbed his lesson books, and set out. But soon after crossing Jefferson Street and into Washington Park, he became unexplainably apprehensive. Still, he continued on, making his way along a well-worn dirt path. Birds and squirrels chirped and chattered happily, but there was a queer sort of foreboding in the air, and he became fearful. Why and of what he didn't know. A colorful songbird began following him. It fluttered from tree to tree, singing merrily, and when Charlie reached the north end of the park, alighted atop an evergreen. Charlie crossed Gardner Street, entered a familiar old red brick building, and, once inside, climbed a short flight of sagging stairs to his piano teacher's apartment. As he began playing his lesson, he noticed the songbird was now perched on the window ledge. It was waiting for him. He knew it. And though the bird's presence gave him comfort, he became suddenly fearful for its safety. He continued playing, and he heard the bird begin to sing along. But then it stopped, and slowly a feeling of dread came over him. He looked up. The bird was gone, as he knew it would be. His teacher, Mr. Townsend, scolded him. "Charlie, if you can't concentrate, you'll never be ready to play in the competition." Charlie ignored him, got up, and walked slowly to the window. There he saw a small hole in one of the panes of glass, and outside the window on the sill, a clump of bloody feathers. Charlie panicked. He rushed out, hearing his teacher calmly reminding him not to forget his books as he raced down the stairs. He shot back across Gardner Street to the park, but slowed as he approached the playground. The park was eerily silent, except for the clinking of a park swing. He wanted to turn around, but something made him walk on. When he reached the swing, it was vacant, dangling ominously as though someone had just deserted it. Underneath it was the tiny corpse of the songbird, lying motionless on the ground. Charlie awakened in a sweat, his heart pounding. He lay still, looking straight up at the shadows on the ceiling, the clock on the mantel continuing to tick quietly. Charlie was up at 8:30 the next morning, and by 9 o'clock was turning into CJ's gravel driveway. CJ was the go-to Hudson family mechanic, partly because he was cheap, but also because he could fix pretty much anything. Charlie's dad used to say, "If I didn't know CJ, I'd be riding a horse." To CJ, there was no car that couldn't be fixed. That was important to the Hudsons, because the kind of cars they owned were always second or third-handers, the ones other people were convinced they had driven into the ground. And CJ had a knack for somehow keeping them all on the road. It was a semi-residential lot with a small clapboard house surrounded by overgrown shrubbery and a sea of junked vehicles. CJ lived in the house, but worked out back in a flat-roofed garage constructed of cinder blocks. The cinder blocks, once painted white, were now weathered and peeling. It didn't look pretty, but looks were often deceiving. Like Charlie had discovered from living in New York City, the dumpy little hole-in-the-wall joints often served the best food. Charlie got out of his car and walked toward the garage. As he approached, he saw the worn soles of 2 boots poking out from under a flatbed truck. He could hear the sharp sound of a hammer hitting metal. Before he had a chance to speak, a familiar voice rang out from under the truck.
"What can I do for you?"
"Is that you, CJ?" Charlie asked.
"Who might be asking?"
"Charlie Hudson."
"Dave's boy?"
"That's me." Charlie heard some scuffling, and a moment later was face to face with CJ. His face looked just as Charlie remembered, but he was heavier around the middle. He wore a dirty Cleveland Indians baseball cap and the same grin as when his dad first introduced them over 20 years prior. CJ wiped the grease off his hand and offered it.
"What are you doing in town? I thought you were in New York."
Charlie grabbed CJ's hand and shook it. "I'm here to pick up a few things from the estate."
"Sorry about your dad. Pass it on to your brother.
He took his cap off and swatted at a fly buzzing around his head. "Tom," Charlie reminded him.
"Yeah, Tom, right."
He reset his cap.
"So, what can I do for you?"
"I got a punctured radiator. I was hoping you could take a look."
"Can't right now. Gotta get this beast,"
he thumbed towards the flatbed he'd crawled from under,
"on the road. I promised the guy this afternoon."
Charlie sighed. Then he remembered a trick his dad often used to get immediate attention. "I guess I could take it over to the car clinic." The car clinic was a franchised outfit that had moved into town about 10 years prior and was gobbling up a lot of business from small garages. They were really no competition for CJ, but the idea of a big chain taking work from little shops really got under CJ's skin.
"You don't want to do that, Charlie. Probably won't even look at it. Just try to sell you a new one. I've seen him do it plenty of times."
"Unfortunately, CJ, I got a timetable." It was a standoff marked by a long silence. CJ swatted at the fly again, looked at his watch, and asked,
"Keys in it?"
Charlie grabbed a ring of keys from his pocket, extracted the ignition key, and slapped it in CJ's hand. "Thanks, CJ." CJ began to walk away when Charlie suddenly remembered something. "Oh, CJ?" CJ stopped and turned. "One other thing. I'm kinda stranded." CJ removed his cap and looked down. Then he reset his cap and began walking toward the front of the lot. Charlie followed. It was wall-to-wall vehicles in various states of disgrace. To anyone else, it was just a bunch of ordinary junk cars, but not to CJ. He was like the mother sheep looking over her flock of lambs, and he already had a lamb in mind.
"There's a mail truck I could let you have for a few days,"
he said without looking back. "I don't care about gender as long as it runs." CJ chuckled as he led the way to a large, faded blue postal vehicle.
"Bought her in an auction for $300. Has a good motor, brakes, and tires."
He jumped on the running board, stuck his hand through the open driver's side window, and snatched a key from the visor. He put the key in the ignition and started it up. It was loud, probably in need of a muffler. CJ shouted something that was drowned in the roar of the motor. If CJ was asking for Charlie's approval, he was going to get it. Charlie couldn't afford to be picky. CJ was already being pretty damn nice to take a look at his radiator over a prior commitment. "Sounds good," Charlie yelled.
"Call me later this afternoon,"
yelled CJ as Charlie backed the mail truck out into the street and roared off to rent a trailer. Tom had finished painting the dining room and was clearing the living room so it could be prepped and painted by the time Charlie returned. "So, what's the good word?" Tom asked as he carried a tall stack of boxes into the dining room. Charlie dropped his keys on a table, fell into an armchair, and sighed. "Some good news on my end," Tom said from the dining room. "Tenants can't move in until next month, so the pressure's off." He came back into the room. "And I have to say, your timing is perfect. Most of the remaining stuff is yours. Now, instead of lugging it in here and then back out to the trailer, we can save ourselves a trip and carry it directly to the trailer. Saves us a bunch of time." He began packing a box with bric-a-brac. "Come on, don't keep me in suspense. How'd it go?" Not so good, Charlie said. Tom continued packing, not looking up. What do you mean? See for yourself, motioning Tom to look outside. Tom stopped. He stood up, walked to the living room window, and peeked through the blinds. So, where's the trailer? And what's with the mail truck out there? Asked Tom. The mail truck is courtesy of CJ. I needed wheels after dropping off my car, and that's what he loaned me. Tom turned. Okay, so then where's the trailer? He went back to packing. The trailer, dear sweet brother of mine, is in the U-Haul lot. I went through all the bullshit of renting it, but wasn't able to bring it back because the truck CJ loaned me didn't have a hitch. Tom was closing the flaps of the box. What are you going to do? Well, if I can get my car back from CJ before the U-Haul place closes, I could still pick up the trailer and bring it over tonight. They close at 6, but that's only providing CJ can fix it. Tom grunted as he lifted the box and then lugged it to the dining room. Well, if I were a betting man, which I am, I would say CJ is going to come through for us. Tom returned and, with his hands on his hips, stood in the middle of the living room and surveyed it. Okay, looks like the only remaining stuff is yours, Charlie. How's your toe feeling? We're starting with that, huh? Charlie moaned. Unfortunately, yeah. Got to get it a few feet from the wall. At least it's got wheels, Tom said. Tom and Charlie each took an end of the upright and rolled it toward the center of the living room. Now we can pile your stuff around it and still get to all the walls, Tom said. They began stacking Charlie's possessions around the piano. Charlie grabbed the piano bench and was about to tuck it under the front of the piano when Tom asked, Do you want to keep that? Keep what, the bench? It's got a wobbly leg and it doesn't even belong to this piano. I was thinking of tossing it. Charlie put it down and wiggled it. Yeah, it's pretty unstable. Tom continued to stack items against the piano as Charlie gave the bench a quick overall appraisal. The rest of it's in pretty good condition, though, he said. Might be just a loose bracket inside. Charlie opened the lid and saw that it was full of his old music books. At the corners of the bench were metal brackets that secured each leg. On one corner, a bolt that extended from the leg and through the bracket was missing a wing nut. Here's the problem right here, Charlie said. Figuring the nut was probably buried under the books, he emptied the bench. Hiding among paper clips, a pencil, and a little metal car was the wing nut. Charlie threaded the nut back on the bolt and tightened it. He then wiggled the bench. Much better, he said. He began stacking the music books back in the bench, but stopped when he came to a tattered paperback manuscript entitled Bertrand's Complete Anthology of Famous Rags. He suddenly saw Valerie, the waitress, waving her dishcloth. What do you got there, Charlie? Tom asked. My old lesson book, he said. Mind if we take a break and let me try some of these out? Be my guest, Tom said. Charlie set the bench in front of the piano and sat down. Placing the book on the piano's music desk, he opened it to the first song. At the top right of the page, scribbled in pencil, was the date, August 1991. He began to plunk out the notes, and though he was mangling it, the melody had a familiar ring. The piano had a few sticky keys, but considering it had not been played in years, was in pretty decent shape. Charlie turned to the next song. The date written on the page was December 1991. A Santa Claus sticker was affixed to the page, and there was a note also in pencil. Nice job. It was his teacher, Townsend, who had written it. Hey, Tom, remember this one? He stumbled through it the best he could, knowing Tom would remember. Oh my God, does that bring back memories, said Tom, now resting his elbow on the piano case. You like it? I hate it, but I like the memories. Charlie then noticed one of the songs in the anthology had been bookmarked. When he flipped to the page, the small piece of cardboard marking it fell out onto the floor. Charlie didn't notice as he was riveted to the title, Back to Life. Under the title was the composer's name, Charles Hunter, 1876 to 1906. The hair on the back of Charlie's neck bristled. It was the song he had whistled. The name the waitress couldn't remember. The same one that had eluded him for the past 3 days. In the upper right corner, in Townsend's scribble, was the date September 1992, and a note, piano competition piece. It was the song he played in his dream. Tom, completely unaware of the internal revelations that had just blindsided Charlie, picked up the bookmark from the floor. "I believe you dropped this, maestro," Tom said, casually handing Charlie the bookmark. Charlie gave it a cursory glance and was about to put it down when he stopped. Something unsettled him. He looked at the card again, more closely this time, somehow knowing its significance was more than just a bookmark. "What's up, buddy?" Tom asked. Charlie ignored him and fixated on the card. It was blank, had ragged edges, and a waxy feel to it. Then it all came back, and he knew exactly what it was. It frightened him, but he turned it over anyway. "Are you going to play the song or not?" Tom was asking. But Charlie didn't hear him. Instead, he gazed at a grainy black and white photograph of a young, smiling girl. She wore pigtails and had a quirky dimple, and was, unmistakably, the same girl Charlie saw in the pickup. He felt sudden exhilaration. "It's her!" Charlie said, his voice hoarse with excitement. "Who's her?" asked Tom. "The missing girl, Tom!" Charlie stood up, barely able to contain himself. "What are you talking about?" Tom was bewildered. Clearly, Charlie was having some sort of epiphany. "The accident I told you about, on the interstate in Nebraska. This is the same girl I saw. Look!" Charlie handed the bookmark to Tom. Tom made an examination while Charlie paced. "What is this, anyway?" "I cut it from a milk carton. I must have been 13. Tom held the card, carefully scrutinizing the images, making sure he was seeing what Charlie was seeing. "Wait a second. Let me get this straight. When you were 13, you cut this girl's picture from a milk carton, and now you think that this is the same girl you saw in Nebraska?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Tom." While Charlie paced, Tom spoke calmly. "Charlie, this photo is from 22 years ago. Do you know how much a person can change in 22 years? How could you possibly recognize her now?" "It's her, Tom, I know it. I would never forget her face." He grabbed the card from Tom. "Look, see that dimple?" Charlie paused, suddenly having another realization. "It was right after the accident. In the diner when I started whistling the song. It's crazy, Tom, but my subconscious knew it was her before I did." Okay, calm down. There's a pretty simple way to prove all of this. We just need to get the police report. They'll have all the info we need." Charlie was suddenly silent. "You did call the police, right?" Tom asked. "I asked the old woman if she wanted to, but she wouldn't answer. Of course I wasn't about to call them. I would have gotten a ticket." Tom sighed. "Well, you just screwed yourself. You'll never find her now." "But we can't just let them get away, Tom." "We? Time out, Charlie. Let's think this through logically." Tom took the card from Charlie. "First of all, even if it is this," Tom read from the card, "Leslie Samantha Weld, which is like 1 chance in a million, maybe a billion. How are you going to track her down? What do you have to go on?" "I know her name." "Charlie, everybody who drank milk knew her name. What kind of a lead is that?" Charlie desperately tried to reason with Tom. "It says her middle name is Samantha, right? The old woman called her Sam." "That's not a lead. It may support the idea that the girl is who you say it is, but she lives in Nebraska." "You're kidding, right? You think of something." "This is your story, not mine," Tom shouted. Then, in a mildly sarcastic tone, said, "I do have another question, though. You said Sam was with an older woman. Who was that?" "I have no idea," Charlie said. "Did she seem threatening in any way?" "Not really." "And when you saw Sam, did she seem to be trying to get away?" Charlie paused, then admitted, "Well, no." "Don't you think that's a little strange?" Charlie threw his arms up in frustration. "Maybe she was drugged, or maybe they reprogrammed her mind. They can do that, you know." "Charlie, this is getting nutty." "I can't explain it, Tom, but I know it's her. And I gotta do something about it. I, at least, have to check it out." "And how exactly are you going to do that?" Charlie thought for a moment. "Go back to where I saw her." "Nebraska?" "Yes," Charlie insisted. Tom slapped his head in exasperation. "Charlie, with no leads, you're going to drive hundreds of miles to where? You'll make a fool of yourself." Charlie was stoic when he said, "Tom, I know it's her. I feel it. And if I don't act on this, I will never forgive myself." Tom threw up his arms, shrugged, and sighed.
"Do what you gotta do."
Charlie went to the window, peeled open the blinds, and stared out, while Tom put his head in his hands. For a good minute, neither spoke. Then Tom sighed and looked over at his brother. "Look, Charlie." Charlie continued to stare out of the window. "Now, first off, you can't go driving to Nebraska blind. That's just pure lunacy. Let's comb through the facts. Maybe we can find something that will justify the trip. If we can, I'll even go with you. I'd love to have an excuse not to paint this effing living room." He looked at his watch. "Let's get some lunch and talk it over." Charlie was still facing the window, but looking down now. "Okay, buddy?" Tom asked again. Charlie turned and said, "Okay." They took Tom's truck to a greasy spoon on Humboldt Street called the Blackbird Cafe. It was an eclectic little eatery in Denver's Capitol Hill district. Though mostly popular with the counterculture crowd, it also attracted patrons of many stripes who favored good food over atmosphere. At the front of the diner were a row of several wooden booths, separated by trellised fake grapevines. In the back, 50s-style chrome tables and chairs were available to parties of more than 4, and could be pushed together to accommodate even larger groups. Charlie and Tom grabbed a booth, and over grilled cheese sandwiches and coffee, reviewed what they knew. "That's fascinating, Charlie. It really is," Tom said, taking a bite of his sandwich and attempting to wipe a smudge of ketchup off of his chin. "But you don't seem to understand my point. You can give me 1,000 reasons why you think this girl, Sam, is the girl you saw in Nebraska. But the only way to ever prove it is to find her. That means we need something concrete to go on. Without that, we're on a wild goose chase. Now, you know way more than me about this, so help me to catch up." Charlie handed Tom a napkin. "On your chin? There." Tom snarled as he wiped his chin. "Sorry, Tom. I couldn't look at that anymore and concentrate on what you were saying." Tom rolled his eyes. "Okay, so let me see that card again." Charlie handed Tom the bookmark so that he could inspect it. He examined it and then laid it on the table between them. "Show me this mark on her cheek." Charlie leaned forward, crooking his head. "It's right here, this one. See it?" Tom picked up the card and examined it closely. "Okay, yeah. It's like a little dimple. That's it. Is that the only thing that makes you think it's her?" "Not the only thing, but an important one," Charlie said. Tom continued looking at the card, trying to imprint the image into his brain, when he asked, "Tell me, when was the first time you actually met Sam?" "The first time?" Charlie thought back. "I was on my way to a lesson with Mr. Townsend. She was sitting on a swing by herself. I looked around and I didn't see an adult anywhere near, so I decided to find out what was up. She told me she lived in the apartment building on Gardner Street, next to Townsend's building. Her mother sent her over to the park to play." Tom was baffled. "Did you say Gardner Street? I think it's Girard." Charlie thought for a moment. "Wait, I think you're right. It is Girard. Funny, in my dream the street is Gardner." "What dream is that?" "Oh yeah, I don't think I ever told you this, but when I was younger I began having this recurring dream. Really a nightmare, right after she was abducted. I kept having it for about 5 years and then it just stopped. Well, I had it again last night. For some reason in the dream, Girard Street is Gardner." "Interesting." A loud, gregarious party entered the diner and stood uncomfortably close to their table. As the group waited to be seated, a little girl yanked on her mommy's sleeve while a younger boy stared blankly at Tom and Charlie. Tom lowered his voice. "So when the girl told you her mother sent her to the park to play, what did you make of that?" "At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Then I was too naive to see what was going on. Later I developed some theories." "Like what?" Tom asked. "It was pretty obvious that her mom was—" Charlie glanced sideways, seeing the boy's eyes were still on him. He smiled at Tom, sipped his coffee, and waited for the group to be seated. Moments later, a waitress holding a stack of menus announced to the group that their table was ready. The group began to move. Charlie continued. A prostitute. He cringed when he saw the boys still standing there. A woman's arm shot out from the group, collared the boy, and whisked him away. Guess what word he's going to be looking up tonight, Tom said. They both chuckled. Tom continued. So, why was it obvious? Because I asked her where her mother was, and she said, home. So I offered my hand, and I told her I would take her there. She shook her head, saying, no, Mommy has company now. Tom nodded. How old do you think the little girl was? Not sure, 7 or 8. Her birth date is on the bookmark. Tom checked the bookmark. She would have been 7. He shook his head. Wow, a 7-year-old by herself in a city park. No adults around, no other kids? Yeah, it was definitely weird, but what could I do? I was 13. So, what did you do? I befriended her. Started bringing her sandwiches, cookies, other food. She told me she liked music, and that gave me an idea. Knowing Townsend's studio was in earshot of the park, I convinced him to keep the window open during my lessons, told him it was too stuffy. That way she could hear. I could see her from the window as I played. It became a routine, and she became someone to play for. One time on my way home, I made a startling discovery. She was on her swing, humming, and as I got closer, I realized it was one of the songs from my lesson. Later, I discovered she could hum all of the songs I played. 7 years old. Amazing, Tom said. How many times did you see her? In total, I saw her about 5 or 6 times. When I finally told Mom and Dad about her, they became instantly concerned. They even talked about calling the police, but by the time they got around to it, Charlie looked down, swallowing hard. When was the last time you saw her? The last time was during a lesson. It was autumn and chilly. She wasn't wearing a coat, and I noticed she had a cold. I had brought her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She really liked those. I remember before heading to my lesson, she reminded me to open the window so some lady could listen too. What lady? Did she mention a name? I think she did, but I can't remember what it was. Would you know it if you heard it again? Possibly. Go on, Tom said. I promised her I would open the window, but when I got to my lesson, Townsend wouldn't let me. He said it was too cold out. As I played my scales, I watched her through the window, swinging all by herself, looking up. It was so sad it made me cry. Townsend was thrilled, thought I was really into my scales. I remember seeing a lady come over and start talking to her. When Townsend caught me looking out of the window, he said I was not focusing on my music, so he sat in front of the window and blocked my view for the rest of the lesson. After my lesson, I bolted out of there and ran down to the swing. She was gone. I remember the birds pecking at the remains of her sandwich. A few days later, she was reported as missing. It was the first time I'd heard the name Leslie Samantha Weld. Who reported her missing? Charlie shrugged. I guess her mother. Tom took a break and sipped his coffee. This is a crazy story, you realize? I'm not making it up. No, I know that. It's just that... Now, you said she was born in what, 1985? Yeah, 1985. And that would make her 29, said Charlie. Right. So do you think that was about the age of the girl you saw in the truck? Yeah. And who is this woman she was with? No idea. Maybe the same woman she said was her friend 22 years ago? Maybe. I never saw her up close. Did the police ever question you about her? Yeah, and I told them everything I knew. To be quite honest, being 13 and all, I don't think they took me too seriously. One thing that really sticks in my mind is that Sam is out in public. It's not like you discovered her tied up in a basement somewhere. She seems to be happy, right? Yeah, Charlie said. And while we're on the subject of the police, at the accident, when you offered to call a trooper, why do you think the old woman didn't answer? I don't know, Charlie said. Maybe she didn't hear me? Maybe she thought there wasn't enough damage to justify calling the cops? Then again, maybe she didn't want any undue attention. Tom nodded. And this is probably a dumbass question because you would have said something by now, but when the truck pulled away, you didn't, by any chance, catch a license number, even part of one? Charlie shook his head. Sorry, Tom. In fact, I don't even remember seeing a license plate. That's interesting. You think they didn't have one? Tom remarked. Charlie shrugged. It was a farm vehicle. I've heard that farmers take unlicensed vehicles on the road all the time. Could be the answer. But another possibility is that whoever is involved in this didn't want the truck to be traced. Maybe. But wouldn't it be crazier to drive around without a license plate? That might draw more unwanted attention from the authorities. You're right. Probably just didn't see it, Tom added, and sipped his coffee in silence. Charlie broke it. So what do you think, Tom? You probably already know what I think, right? You think I'm nuts. On the contrary, Charlie, I'm more convinced than ever that what you've been telling me is absolutely true. There are too many details and too many coincidences. The problem is I don't know how to follow up on any of it. I wouldn't even know where to start. Tom shrugged. Sorry. Charlie looked down and sighed. Despite his certainty, there seemed to be nothing on God's green earth he could do to prove it. At least he had comfort in the fact that Tom believed him, and that was perhaps the best he could hope for. He looked up at Tom, smiled, and then downed the rest of his coffee. The waitress approached. Would you gentlemen like anything else? More coffee? Dessert? Tom was about to answer. Just a check, said Charlie. The waitress totaled their bill as they both gazed in silence out of the window. Thank you, gentlemen, she said as she placed their check on the table, collected their plates and cups, and left. Charlie reached for the check, but Tom was quicker, snatching it out from under his fingers. Tom took out his wallet and began peeling off bills. Come on, Tom, let me pay. No, this one's on me, Tom smiled. It was nearly 2:00 by the time Charlie and Tom left the Blackbird. As they headed home, Charlie suddenly remembered his car. Hey, Tom, do you mind if we swing by CJ's? He wanted me to call him. I'd like to see what progress he's made. If you don't mind, I'd first like to check on something for myself. Tom looked over his shoulder, merged onto the boulevard, and headed east. Where are we going? Townsend's studio. What for? Charlie asked. Tom didn't answer as he headed up the north side of Washington Park. As he approached the street at the top of the park, he slowed. There it is, he said, pointing to a green street sign partially hidden in foliage. You were right, Tom. It is Gerard. Tom turned right and drove until he came to the little brick building that was once Townsend's studio. It was now a travel agency. He stopped. See up there? Charlie said, pointing to a second-floor window. For a brief moment they stared in silence at the very same window Charlie had convinced Townsend to leave open, 22 years prior. A bird swooped overhead. Their eyes followed it across the street and into the park where it disappeared over a tree. The foliage looked more lush than Charlie remembered, and the park was nearly unrecognizable. The leather swing seat was gone, and a variety of colorful birds now chattered around a concrete fountain that was constructed in its place. Deeper into the park, a new playground had been built, and they could hear the distant shrieks and laughter of children. Charlie was gazing out the truck window, 22 years into the past, when Tom patted him on the back. Ready to go? Charlie nodded. When they arrived at CJ's, he was under the flatbed, hammering away. He must have heard their footsteps on the driveway, because he yelled, Who goes there? It's me, Charlie, and Tom. Came by to check on my radiator. Had to order a new one, CJ exclaimed, still hammering. Wasn't fixable, huh? Nope. The hammering stopped, and CJ shimmied his way from under the flatbed. Moments later, he was standing in front of them. He nodded to Tom as he wiped his hands with an oil rag. Fins were slashed real good. The new one will be here tomorrow. He chuckled. Remind me to show you what happened. Never seen anything like it. How long to put it in? Charlie asked, shielding his eyes from the bright sun. Hard to say. With all the rust you got, might have to get creative with the frame. Call me tomorrow night. Charlie saw an old fender laying against a tree and wanted to kick it, but thought better. What's wrong with the mail truck? CJ asked. It doesn't have a trailer hitch. I need to get a U-Haul over to the house so I can start loading up my stuff. I really need to be headed back to New York by Wednesday.
Sure like to cut it close, don't you?
Yeah, Charlie, Tom interjected. Why don't you call Larry What's-His-Face and tell him you can't make it back by Friday? It'll give you 3 extra days. I'm sure he'll understand. You don't know Larry, Charlie said.
Well, you're welcome to use the mail truck for as long as you need it. It's got valid plates and a recent sticker.
I appreciate that, CJ, Charlie said.
Anytime. Oh, before you go,
CJ said,
I want to show you guys something.
They watched CJ head to his garage and disappear through a doorway. Tom said, I have to admit, I'm being haunted by your little riddle now, too. Riddle? You know, Sam. I can't help wondering what happened to her. I need to move on, Tom. If I don't, it'll drive me crazy. CJ was now walking back from his shed, lugging what appeared to be a radiator. I understand, Tom sighed. If you don't want me bringing it up anymore, just say the word. I know how to shut up. But I just feel like if we had one tiny clue, just something to get us started, we could... CJ interrupted Tom.
Here she be. See the slice through the fins there?
CJ tipped the radiator so Tom and Charlie could get a good look. What the devil did that? Asked Charlie. CJ chuckled, handing Charlie a crumpled Nebraska license plate. It read, Farm Truck, with the numbers 35, 43, 66.
You must have hit him pretty hard. Nearly drove it clean through.
Tom was exuberant as he drove back to the house. I've heard of plums falling in people's laps, but that was a friggin' watermelon. Charlie didn't say anything, cradling the crumpled plate like a mother bear guarding her cub and smiling at the cloudless sky. When they got back, Tom immediately went to his computer to do a DMV license lookup, while Charlie was tasked with the unthinkable, asking Larry for an extra day. He already knew the answer, but it was only right that he let him know, even if he was an asshole. Charlie had been on the phone with Larry for only a couple of minutes when Tom bolted into the kitchen. Hey, Charlie, check this out, Tom said, frantically waving a piece of paper in the air. Charlie put up his hand, signaling to Tom that he wouldn't be long. Yes, Mr. Delmonico. Yes, I understand. That works perfect for me. And you enjoy your weekend, too. Okay, bye. He hung up. What's up, Tom? Charlie, you're not going to believe what I found. I did the license lookup and the plates are registered to, are you ready for this? A Mrs. Agnes Gardner. No shit, Charlie exclaimed. That's what it says. Let me see that, Charlie said, motioning for the paper Tom held. It was an official document Tom had printed from the internet. Charlie read it to himself. Registrant, Mrs. Agnes Gardner. The very name he confused with Gerard. He read on. 1983 Chevrolet pickup, green, license plate 354366, VIN number 12582DR21H99, 376 Deerholm Street, Chadron, Nebraska, 69337. This is amazing, Tom. He could barely contain himself. Do you know what this means? I certainly do. It means I now have an unassailable reason to blow off prepping and painting the living room. Tom grabbed Charlie and hugged him. All at once he stopped. Oh, wait. What is it? Charlie asked. Tom stepped back. I forgot to ask. What did Larry say? Are you going to be able to get the weekend off? I lucked out, Tom. He told me I could take as many days as I would like. Really? Yep. He fired me. They weren't thrilled about their mode of travel, but they didn't have a lot of options. It was a choice between Tom's truck with 4-ball tires, an expired inspection sticker, a leaky brake line, and something else wrong that Tom couldn't remember, and the mail truck with blown shocks, hard seats, and a loud muffler. It was one of those 2 dead ends and you still gotta choose scenarios. They figured the only advantage the mail truck might have is that it would lend a quasi-official tone to their undertaking. But even that was questionable, since they didn't have a firm grasp on exactly what it was they would be undertaking. It was close to 4:30 when they left. So hell-bent and eager to make their destination, it didn't occur to them they would be driving through rush hour. For the first 50 miles of the trip, it was an anxiety-filled stop-and-go ordeal. But once traffic lessened, Tom and Charlie finally had some uninterrupted time to relax and talk. Charlie checked his mirror and merged onto Interstate 76 North toward Chadron. To the west, a vibrant red sun was setting over the Rockies and backlighting wispy lavender clouds. In the cool dusk, thousands of tiny streetlights were suddenly visible, dotting the landscape and glowing in every direction. Tom rode with the window down, taking in the cool, dry air. "I'll tell you one thing. We couldn't have picked a better night to travel." "It is beautiful, isn't it?" Charlie said. "I wonder how CJ would feel about us taking his mail truck out of the state." "Well, he knows we're going," Charlie replied. "I gave him the number of the motel we'd be staying at, in case he needs to get a hold of us. Probably thinks we took your truck, though. But you were there when he said we could have the mail truck for as long as we needed it." "He did say that, didn't he?" Tom rolled up his window to cut the roar of the engine and said to Charlie, "I have to admit, I'm pretty impressed with the way you took getting axed." "It's not that impressive at all, Tom. Larry did me a favor." "I thought you liked your job." "I did, before I understood it wasn't carpentry. After all, that's why I took the job in the first place. And Larry never let on it was anything else. He was always promising me all this finish work. He'd string me along, saying, 'Just wait a week, you gotta be patient, I won't let you down.' But it was all bullshit. When the carpentry jobs came down, they always went to his drinking buddies. I'd get stuck with a broom or knocking down some friggin' wall. I'm glad to be out of there, Tom." "Sounds like it was meant to be," said Tom. "I know I could never work for somebody like that. Probably why I'm self-employed." "How are you faring now that you're a single man? You're not going to ask about her, are you?" "Didn't mean to," Charlie said. That's okay. Hallie and I only speak through our attorneys now. By the way, I hear the lawyers are hitting it off great. Ironic thing is, those statutory bloodsuckers will probably get married and have a big expensive wedding for about what this divorce is costing me. Some friendly advice. If you ever plan to tie the knot, and then untie it, make sure the lawyers despise each other. Otherwise they'll team up and take both of you to the cleaners." Charlie laughed. "So, how about you?" Tom asked. "Any irons in the fire?" "Nothing serious. After Marion, I think I'm a little gun-shy. But if the right girl came along, maybe you should move out of New York. That place is weird." "Yeah, it is. But I love it," Charlie sighed. "Just don't know if it loves me." It was 9:15 when Charlie pulled CJ's mail truck into the parking lot of the Chadron Luxury Budget Motel. A large, flickering neon sign reading "Vacancy" and one dim, mosquito-enchanted security light was all that illuminated the area. Tom woke up, groggy, and asked, "We here?" "Yep," Charlie said. "And this thing is so damn loud it's waking everybody up. Look at the lights going on." Tom, slouched, feet up on the dash, peeked above the window to get a look. "What the hell? It's not even 10 o'clock. A lady in curlers and her portly husband in a wife-beater had come out onto the veranda to see what the ruckus was. "I didn't know the post office worked this late, Ed," the woman said. "Probably special deliverance," they heard Ed say. Tom grabbed his gut, unable to contain his laughter. Charlie tried to shush him. "Did you hear what he said?" Tom was holding his belly. "Shh," said Charlie. "Now I gotta park this thing and shut it off before I wake the whole place." He looked around and located a spot. It was a bit further from the office than he would have liked, but it allowed him to kill the motor sooner, so he took it. Tom was still giddy with laughter, and Charlie was trying to quiet him as they gathered their belongings, locked the truck, and headed to the office to rent a room. The office was small and rectangular, with low ceilings and a high desk that separated the room longitudinally. The industrial carpet that covered the floor appeared to have been victimized by hordes of travelers, as evidenced by the numerous coffee stains, cigarette burns, and random acts of chewing gum. On the right side of the room were 2 vending machines where candy and sodas could be purchased, and on the other end, 2 low chairs with vinyl cushions in which a towering load of laundry had been stowed. Charlie and Tom looked over the counter and found the manager immersed in a crossword puzzle. Tom lightly smacked a tiny silver bell on the counter, and she immediately looked up. "Oh, sorry," she said, pulling her glasses down.
Sometimes I get so caught up in my puzzles I don't see people come in. Drives my husband crazy. So, how can I help you?
I'm Charlie Hudson, and this is my brother Tom. I called earlier. The manager set her glasses back on her nose and began thumbing through a small card file.
Did you say Hudson?
That's right.
Oh, yes, here it is. You wanted a double?
That's right.
1 night or 2?
1 night. Maybe 2. We're going to play it by ear for now.
That's fine. I just want to warn you, the high school is putting on a big show this week. Oklahoma. My sister flew in from Buffalo to direct, and my daughter Peggy's playing sheep number 3. Should be a lot of people in town, and I got a feeling we're going to be filled up.
Good to know, but I don't think it'll be an issue, Charlie said.
Say, if you fellas aren't doing nothing, you ought to check it out. I can get you some comps. Those are free tickets in case you didn't know.
That's extremely generous, Charlie said, but I'm not so sure we'll have time. We have a pretty tight schedule, Tom said.
Tell you what, I'll have Peggy bring the tickets to your room tomorrow. If you don't use them, that's okay. It's not assigned seating anyways. It's first come, first serve.
We'll see. It sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it, Tom? A lot of fun, Tom said.
Good, okay.
She extracted a key from the pegboard behind her.
Your room is 126. It's on the first floor, out the door and around the corner. If you need anything, just call the office.
Fantastic, said Charlie. Thanks, said Tom. Their room was one of those run-of-the-mill, nondescript units with lots of fake paneling and a slightly cleaner version of the same industrial carpeting they saw in the office. Hung on the walls were cheap prints, made to look like oil paintings, and over a single window were board-approved patterned drapes made of some anti-stain, anti-wrinkle, anti-human material. Adjacent to the window and against the wall were 2 double beds separated by a nightstand. On the stand was a telephone, several brochures, and a stack of paperbacks. Taped to the lamp was a sticky note that said, "Compliments of Management," with an arrow pointing to the books. Tom put down his suitcase, walked over to the stand, grabbed the top book, and fanned the pages. Then he read the cover out loud. Dell's Fun to Solve Word Jumbles. Must get pretty boring around here. Probably won't need that, Charlie said. The next morning, Charlie was up first. He sat on his bed with a cup of coffee, going over notes he made for himself, while Tom was curled up under the covers, snoring loudly. A short while later, he saw movement from the other bed and heard a groggy voice from under the covers.
What time is it?
9:30.
What?
Tom poked his head out.
Why didn't you wake me?
You were so gone it seemed cruel.
I wish you would have. I was having a nightmare. Hallie and I were getting back together.
Tom rolled out of bed and began looking for his pants. So when do you want to get over there? No rush, Tom. I was just planning a strategy here. Strategy? Tom said as he got dressed. What's wrong with just going over to the address and knocking on the door? Nothing. I was just thinking through some possible pitfalls of different approaches. Tom was buttoning his shirt. Such as? Well, when we go to the door, assuming the old woman answers. If we go together, she'll then know both of us, right? Currently, she knows only me. But if I go by myself, you can remain anonymous. We don't know who we're dealing with here. It could be one person or a ring. They could be completely innocent or really dangerous. I'd like to get a little feedback before we dive in. And I'd like you to watch from a distance. In case I get into trouble, you could call the cops. Makes sense. What else? We need to be discreet. Maybe we should keep the truck out of view, in case we need it later but don't want it recognized. Good point. A mail truck in Nebraska with Colorado plates and a blown muffler is not exactly discreet. Anything else? If you can think of something, I'm all ears. If not, I'd like to get some breakfast, and then do it. I'm ready. Let's go, said Charlie. It was 10:30 when Charlie and Tom left the diner. 15 minutes later, their truck was idling at a stop sign on West 4th Street, and they were staring at the Gardner house. Charlie crept slowly through the intersection, giving them a lay of the land. The house was at the northeast corner of Deer Home and West 4th Street. It was a large Victorian with clapboard siding, fish-scale shingled gables, and a classic wraparound porch. 2 large deciduous trees shaded the south side of the house, and a scrubby, water-starved lawn surrounded it on all sides. Though it was an impressive structure, it had obviously suffered years of neglect. Charlie drove past and parked a block away, in front of the First Congregational Church on Chadron Avenue. They got out of the truck and split up. Charlie tucked the license plate under his arm and headed up the north side of the street closest to the house, while Tom took the south side. As Charlie neared the corner, he began to feel exceedingly conspicuous. Out of nowhere, a small florist truck appeared, zipped around the corner, and stopped in front of the house. A delivery boy in a white uniform hopped from the truck with a large bouquet of flowers, dashed up the steps of 376, and rang the bell. Charlie hoped Tom was watching, but resisted the urge to look across the street, or even slow down, as it might draw attention to Tom or himself. Continuing his normal pace to the corner, he then turned right on Deerhome Street. As he did, out of his peripheral vision, he saw Tom continuing across Deerhome and heading up West 4th. That was good, he thought. He had no idea what Tom was planning, but figured he would be doubling back at some point, so that he would have the ability to discreetly observe the whole interaction from a safe distance. Charlie continued on until he was directly in front of the house. Casting a quick, furtive glance toward the front door, he saw the delivery boy handing the bouquet to whoever answered the bell. Charlie kept walking to the end of the block, then turned around. Seconds later, the delivery truck drove past. He then quickened his pace toward the house, all the while surveying the area for any sight of Tom. He was sure Tom was somewhere in the area, but had no idea of where. After making one quick glance across the street, he decided to make his move. With resolve, he strode up the path, climbed the steps to the porch, and rang the bell. The front door had been left partly ajar, and he was able to see through a screen door into the foyer of the house. In the shadows, propped against a newel post at the bottom of the stairway, was the recently delivered bouquet of flowers. A card, adorned with music notes in glitter, read, "Ms. Lewis." Charlie heard a clamoring from inside the house, and then footsteps approaching. Moments later, the front door swung fully open, and a woman stood before him. It was the same woman who drove the truck he rear-ended 3 days earlier. "Yes," she said, remaining behind the screen door. "Miss Gardner, I'm Charlie Hudson. Do you remember me?" She squinted through the screen. With sudden recognition, she said, "Seems like I do. You ran into my truck several days ago. How'd you find me?" Charlie pulled the license plate from under his arm and showed it to her. She opened the screen door with her foot, just enough to let Charlie hand it to her. Still holding the door open, she affixed a pair of eyeglasses to her nose and examined it. Charlie swallowed hard and asked, "Would you mind, Mrs. Gardner, if I spoke to Sam?" Without looking up, she asked, "Sam?" "Yes," he said. "The young passenger in your truck." She continued to inspect the plate. "You must be mistaken. I had no passenger." Then she looked directly at him. "Don't know any Sam." Charlie was stunned. "But we bounced the back of your truck so that—" The woman was already shaking her head. "No, I think you're confused. You might have been overtired, or maybe you hit your head. But thanks for returning this." She smiled and closed the door. Charlie remained on the porch for a moment, trying to digest what had just transpired. He hadn't counted on such a blunt rebuttal, and it was very convincing. For a brief moment he even wondered if he had dreamt the whole thing. He shook his head. No. She was definitely lying, but wicked good at it. Charlie turned, walked down the steps into the corner, then headed east toward the truck. He was about halfway down the block when he heard footsteps and turned. "Hey, buddy, how'd it go?" Tom was out of breath. "So where'd you go anyway? I saw you heading up 4th. I thought you might double back, but—" "Sorry, bro. That was the plan, but this dog came out of nowhere and started chasing me." "You're kidding me." "Nope. And I'll tell you, it's good that people around here don't lock their cars. Had to jump in one and wait until the damn mongrel got bored and took after a squirrel. Around here you could get shot for doing that." "That did cross my mind. Anyway, how'd you make out?" "Well, the woman who answered the door is Gardner, and she's definitely the same woman I ran into on the highway." That's good. Did you show her the license plate? Yeah, I gave it to her. But listen to this. When I asked to see Sam... Yeah? She said she didn't know a Sam. Wouldn't even acknowledge there was a passenger in her truck. What? That's pure bullshit. Charlie shrugged. She looked me right in the eye and said it. Of course she did. She's guilty of nabbing the girl, and she'll do whatever is necessary to protect herself. A car drove by, causing leaves to swirl at Charlie's feet, making him suddenly wary. I don't feel comfortable out here. Maybe we should have this conversation back in the room, Tom. A dog began barking in the distance, and they watched a squirrel dash up a tree. I'm with you 100%, Tom said. Back at the motel, Tom lounged on the bed, thumbing through Dell's fun-to-solve word jumbles as Charlie gazed out of the window. So where do we boldly go from here, Captain Kirk? Tom asked. Captain Kirk? You're driving the spaceship. My interest is academic. I'm doing this mostly because I find it interesting, and, as you know, because of a deep-seated responsibility I have to avoiding responsibility. Can't paint a living room in Denver while in Nebraska. Well, I hope you're still with me on this. I don't want to think I dragged you 500 miles out of a sane world into some figment of my imagination. Charlie, the world I live in is not even remotely sane, and to think so is an even greater figment of your imagination. Furthermore, I am firmly convinced you're just as sane as I am. That's not helping, Tom. Sorry, shouldn't have said it. As to your question about where to boldly go, I would definitely say not back to Gardner. She knows I'm onto her now. Probably doesn't know why I care, but that's irrelevant. Guess I'm in a bit of a quandary. I put it to you, what would you do if you nabbed a girl and suddenly someone started snooping around, asking to see her? Tom put the book down and sat up. If I was caught off guard, like I'm sure Gardner was, I might do the same. Just deny that Sam exists. Try to make you think you're crazy. Hope you'll go away. I think it was a desperate step, though, and probably not the smartest. You know you're not crazy. Gardner might have been better off telling you Sam moved out of the country. What could you do about it? Your belief that Sam is the abducted girl, no matter how heartfelt, is not compelling evidence. But it's too late for that now. By telling you Sam doesn't exist and trying to make you doubt yourself has made it clear the old woman's hiding something. Maybe we can figure out what it is. So how do we go about that? Tom paused to think, then said, Let's start with what you said you saw in the foyer. What did the card say? Just Miss Lewis, Charlie said. That's all there was? Tom asked. There was some glitter and music notes on the card, but only that name. Who do you think Ms. Lewis is? Tom asked. My first guess would be Sam, Charlie said. I mean, I guess it could be anybody, but those music notes on the card make me lean a little heavier in that direction. With what I saw of her ability to remember melodies, if Sam were to go into any profession, my guess is it would have something to do with music. That makes a lot of sense. Let's look her up in the directory, Tom said. Who knows? We might discover she lives at 376 Deerhome. It won't prove conclusively that Ms. Lewis and Sam are the same person, but it will help establish that Ms. Lewis and Mrs. Gardner are close enough to make it plausible. Charlie located a Shadron phone directory in the motel dresser drawer. Tom watched over Charlie's shoulder as he flipped through to the L's. There were 3 Lewises. Here we go. D. Lewis, 376 Deerhome Street. That was too easy. Now the hard part, said Tom. What's that, Tom? Proving Sam and Ms. Lewis are the same person. Charlie paced the floor as Tom laid on the bed with Dell's fun-to-solve word jumbles. Got any ideas yet, Charlie? I could use some help, Tom. Maybe you should put the book down and start thinking about how to help me solve this. This book is helping me to exercise my brain so that I can help you. There was a timid knock at the door. Charlie kept pacing as Tom got up to answer it. Yes, he asked, opening the door. At first he didn't see anyone. Then he looked down. There was a little red-headed girl with glasses. Sheep number 3, Tom suspected, armed with 2 theater tickets. My mommy wanted you to have these. She handed them to Tom, giggled, and ran off. Thank you, he shouted after her as she disappeared around the corner. Tom closed the door and walked back in the room. Looks like the manager wants us to see Oklahoma." Charlie stopped pacing for a brief moment and said, "Fantastic." Then he resumed. "Gee, maybe we should go, Charlie. Could be a hoot." Tom, we didn't drive all the way from Colorado to Nebraska to go to Oklahoma. Tom paused, scratched his head, and then went to the window to look out. The parking lot was buzzing with activity, and as he watched families lug suitcases toward the office, it appeared that the manager's predictions might have been accurate. He watched a white van pull up in the parking lot and saw a uniformed delivery boy get out. "Hey, Charlie, isn't that the same guy we saw deliver flowers to Miss Lewis?" Charlie stopped pacing and went to the window. "Yeah, it is." Tom continued to watch as the delivery boy took a bouquet of roses to one of the units. "What's Charlie asked. "I was just thinking. Can't we do that too?" Tom asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we got the mail truck," Tom said. "We could deliver flowers, couldn't we?" "Hey, I like that. Of course, you'd have to make the delivery. She's on to me. But I like the concept," Charlie said. "One problem. The truck is so loud, might give us away." "I can fix that. On the way up, I noticed some baling wire between the seats. All we need now is a soup can." "What are you going to do for a uniform, Tom?" "What?" "You can't go up to her door in jeans and a flannel shirt. We want to convince her you're the mailman." "Didn't think of that. Let's jump off that bridge when we get to it," Charlie said. Tom and Charlie went out to the truck to look for materials to patch the muffler. Charlie grabbed the roll of baling wire he had seen between the seats, and they both went around to the back of the vehicle. When they opened the roll-up door, they were surprised to find a treasure trove of junk. Charlie located a tomato paste can, just slightly larger than the diameter of the exhaust pipe, and a pair of rusty but still functional pliers. With his wire, soup can, and pliers, he exited the truck, shimmied under it, and began repairing the exhaust pipe. Meanwhile, Tom searched through an assortment of random items from candelabras to toilet seats, from tennis rackets to replacement windows. By moving a large carton of bubble pack away from the front wall, he exposed a blue metal cabinet with 2 doors latched at the center by a hasp. When he released the hasp, the doors fell open, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Inside hung a leather postal bag, shirt, and pants. On the floor were a pair of scuffed black shoes, and on an upper shelf, an official postman's cap. "Charlie, get your ass in here now!" Charlie had just finished with the exhaust and was about to slide out from under the truck when Tom's shout made him bang his head on the drive shaft. "This better be important," Charlie groaned. He slid out from under the truck, walked around, and stepped up into the back. "What is it, Tom? What's wrong?" He was holding his head, checking for blood. "Look what I found!" Charlie's eyes popped, and he suddenly forgot about the bump on his head. "Wow! This is great! Do they fit?" "Haven't tried 'em on. They look a little big, but we'll make it work. I just need 'em when I walk up to the door. How are you doing with the exhaust?" "Almost done. Just got to clean the blood off the drive shaft." The uniform was filthy and, by Tom's estimation, 1 size too large. So, using a machine at the motel, he decided to launder it and then dry it on the dryer's highest temperature setting. Who knows, maybe it would shrink, he thought. While Tom took care of the uniform, Charlie went over to the motel office to secure another night. Seeing the motel fill up, coupled with the looming possibility that tracking down Sam might require another day, he didn't want to risk getting caught without a room. When he walked into the office, the manager was on the phone with a guest.
"Yes, Mr. Walden, I'll have towels sent over right away."
She hung up, wrote something down, and then said,
"Oh, hello, Mr. Houston."
"Hudson, I'm in 126 and I would like to reserve another night, if that's possible."
"All right, let's see."
She flipped through her card file and asked,
"It's Hudson with a D, right?"
"Yes."
"You're so lucky. I nearly gave your room away. Oklahoma is bringing in even more people than we expected. I heard the show in Crawford got canceled, so we're getting all those people now. Are you going to be able to see it? You did get the tickets."
"Yes, Peggy brought them over, and that was so generous of you, but—"
"Well, I think you'll really enjoy it. You know, I probably shouldn't do this, but they're having a music brush-up rehearsal this afternoon over at the school. I could probably get you in to watch if you'd like. We have such a wonderful music. The phone rang and the manager answered. Shadron Luxury Budget Inn. How may I help you? The manager cradled the phone with her neck as she filled out a card. Charlie took out his wallet and put it on the desk so he would be ready to pay when she got off the phone. He was anxious to get out of there, while at the same time excited about the plan he and Tom had devised. Yes. Yes, the manager said. If you call in an hour, I'll be able to tell you. She hung up and finished filling out the card. You're all set, Mr. Hudson. I sure hope you'll be able to see the show, 'cause it should be excellent. You got the tickets, right? Charlie nodded and smiled. The phone rang again and the manager answered. Shadron Luxury Budget Inn. Charlie quickly made his exit. An hour later, Tom's uniform was done. It smelled a whole lot better and seemed to have even shrunk down slightly. When he tried it on, it wasn't too bad. The sleeve and pant lengths were about right, but it was still baggy, especially around the waist. When Charlie first saw it, he laughed, but the more he thought about it, the more he thought it could work. He suggested that Tom tuck the shirt in further and then use his belt to constrict the pants. By the time they were done, he looked somewhat respectable. Bud Bloom Florist was only 3 blocks from the Gardner house. On their way over, Tom and Charlie discussed the details of their plan. Tom confessed he was a little uneasy about being the one to make the identification. As much as he'd studied the grainy black and white image of 7-year-old Sam and her quirky dimple, being able to recognize her 22 years later in a real-life setting was intimidating. I think we'll have our best shot if we say Ms. D. Lewis has to sign for the flowers, Charlie suggested. That way you'll have time to get a good look at her. Good. I'd like to have as much time as possible. But you do realize that only you'll know if it's really her. If it even looks remotely like her, the odds are it's her. On the left, Tom saw the Bud Bloom sign and pulled into a parking space on the street in front. Tom was about to get out when Charlie turned to him. Maybe you should wait here. I'm pretty sure that impersonating a mailman is a federal offense. If there's any chance we get caught, I'd prefer any related events be as unmemorable and run-of-the-mill as possible. Fine with me. Charlie got out of the truck and went in. It was a small, well-lit shop, which was due to half the ceiling being a skylight. From the other half, potted plants hung from wires and vines dangled. In the center of the room, there were 3 large wooden tables with a vast assortment of flowers in all varieties, colors, and sizes. At the far end of the room, toward the back, were glass refrigerated cases stocked with bouquets and formal flower arrangements, and directly in front of those, behind a counter, stood a small, white-haired woman with wire-rimmed spectacles. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, I would like a bouquet of flowers." "Any particular variety?" Charlie knew nothing about flowers. In the case behind the woman, he saw a small bouquet of roses. "Those red ones, there." "The roses?" "Yeah, those are perfect," Charlie said. The woman opened the case and took out the roses. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "My aunt broke her hip." He had no idea why he said it, but it was the first thing that popped into his head. "Oh dear, I'm sorry. Is she in the hospital?" Charlie stared. "Huh? Oh yes, I'm going to see her in a little while." "Well, we'd be happy to send some additional flowers over. It would be on the house. What hospital?" "Huh? Oh, that's right, they're letting her go home today." "We could send them to her home. Where does she live?" Charlie was trying to dig himself out, but the dirt just kept falling back in. No, these flowers will be enough." "Okay." Then she asked, "Would you like a card with a bouquet?" "Yes, that would be great." "And what would you like it to say?" she asked, with a pen poised over a card. "Just Ms. Lewis," he said, and smiled. She gave him a curious look. "Ms. Lewis broke her hip?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm in a bit of a hurry. If you could just make out the card." The woman carefully made out the card as Charlie fidgeted. When she was done, she asked, "Anything else?" Charlie wanted glitter and music notes, but wanted to get the hell out of there even more. "No, that's it." "That'll be $28.50, please," she said. Charlie reached for his wallet, but discovered he didn't have it with him. Then he remembered. He had left it on the desk in the motel office when he paid for the extra night. Tom surely had his credit card with him, he thought. "1 minute, ma'am."
Charlie went to the window, caught Tom's attention, and waved him in. When Tom came into the shop, he saw the woman's eyes darting between the two of them, trying to process what she was seeing. "What's up?" Tom asked. His clothes were wrinkled and baggy, and he looked like he might be trick-or-treating. "Can you pay for the flowers, Tom? I don't have my wallet with me." "Oh, sure thing." As he watched Tom take out his wallet and hand the woman his credit card, he could only imagine what was going through the woman's head. The woman rang up the flowers and handed them to Charlie along with the receipt.
"I hope your aunt's hip gets better soon,"
she smiled. "Aunt Edna hurt her hip? What's she talking about, Charlie?" "Thanks, ma'am," Charlie said, pushing Tom out of the door. "Wow, Charlie, that was pretty darn run-of-the-mill," Tom said as he slid into the driver's seat of the truck. Charlie hopped in the other side and said, "Shut up." Tom drove to 376 Deer Home and parked. This time they wanted the truck to be seen. It could help give Tom some legitimacy when he delivered the roses. "Okay, Tom, before you get out, let me look at you." Charlie saw a few wrinkles in his uniform and attempted to smooth them. "Now when you walk up there, try to look confident. Here's a clipboard and pen I found in the back with the receipt the florist lady gave me. Have her sign the back of the receipt where I made the X. Remember, it doesn't really matter where she signs, or if she signs at all. It's all just to give you time to identify her. Ready to go?" "Ready." With the roses in one hand and the clipboard under his arm, Tom hopped out of the truck and strode up the walk and onto the porch. Meanwhile, Charlie pressed himself against the back of the cab into the shadows, but still in a position that he could witness everything that was unfolding. He watched as Tom rang the bell. After a few moments, Mrs. Gardner answered. He could see them talking briefly, and then saw Gardner disappear back into the house. Tom gave Charlie a thumbs up behind his back. A minute later, a younger woman came to the door. Charlie had to rub his eyes to make sure he was seeing what he was seeing. The woman had her hair up in curlers and some sort of cream covering her face. What terrible luck, he thought. No way will Tom be able to identify her now. Tom gave the woman the clipboard with the receipt, and Tom watched her sign it. Tom then gave her the bouquet, turned, and walked back toward the truck. A minute later, he was sitting in the driver's seat. "I'm sorry, Charlie. She had this weird cream on her face, and it was impossible to see her features." "It wasn't your fault. It was just bad luck, Tom. We'll have to think of something else." Tom stashed the clipboard next to his seat, and they drove back to the room. When they got back to the motel, as they walked by the office, the manager called to Charlie.
"Oh, Mr. Hudson, you left your wallet here."
Thank God for small towns, Charlie told himself. Tom was in the bathroom, changing out of his mailman uniform and into his street clothes, when he yelled, "I'm starving, Charlie. Can't we go get something to eat while we figure this out?" "Yeah, I'm pretty hungry too," Charlie said. "Where do you want to eat?" "There's a place we passed on the way back called Sarge's. According to the sign, their specialty is desserts, which, as you know, is also my specialty." "What's the rest of the food like?" "I have no idea, but I'm guessing there's not a lot of choices in these parts." "Probably right. If you want to go there, I'm game." Charlie drove this time, and Tom rode shotgun. Tom had brought along Dell's fun-to-solve word jumble book and was absently talking as he solved a word jumble. "I have to say, Charlie, that soup can sure did quiet her down." Charlie had enough. "Did you have to bring along that stupid book? I thought we were going to brainstorm ways to connect Sam and Ms. Lewis." Tom didn't look up. "We can, but I just want to solve this one puzzle. Then we can brainstorm." Charlie was already annoyed, but when he looked over and saw that Tom was using the milk carton bookmark in his puzzle book, he'd had enough. "What the hell?" Tom looked up. "That's my bookmark. You're not supposed to mark your book with that." "That's what bookmarks are for." "Not that one." Okay, Charlie." Tom closed the book. "You win. Let's talk about Ms. Lewis. I have no idea what we're going to solve sitting here, since any connection to Sam rests on you identifying her, and you can't do that until you see her. But go ahead." Charlie came to a traffic light and stopped. "You're giving up?" "Charlie, I want to help you figure this out, but I don't know how to. The only thing that links Ms. Lewis to Sam at this point is a dimple." Tom pulled out the bookmark and looked at it. "And judging from this photograph, it's pretty subtle. Might not even be that noticeable to some people. There must be more than that," Tom said. "Like what?" "I don't know. Like a social security number or a birth certificate with an identifying thumbprint. They changed her name. They must have gone through some process. Tom looked at Charlie. Hey, I just remembered. What is it? Charlie asked. We have her signature. Tom reached over and pulled the clipboard from between the seats and began studying it. A car from behind them honked. Charlie checked his side view mirror and accelerated. The car zipped around them. Her name's Dell. That's funny, eh? Like the Jumble Book, except with an extra E. You think her signature could be traced? Charlie asked. Maybe. Tom was comparing the name on the receipt to the bookmark. If so, it might help us to link her current name to her previous one, but we'd probably have to search some records. Who knows, the name Lewis might even be in Gardner's background. Maybe tomorrow we could call around. I'll bet there's some agency out there that collects this kind of information. Tom was silent, continuing to study the bookmark and the receipt. What is it, Tom? Something in the photo? Charlie asked. This is weird. Tom looked over at Charlie. What? It must be all the jumbles I've been doing. What are you talking about, Tom? Leslie Weld and Dell Lewis. They're anagrams. Charlie slammed on the brakes. What? From the rear, brakes squealed and a car horn sounded. Tom then heard the driver rip off an impressive stream of expletives, ending with an insinuation Charlie had inappropriate relations with a close relative, but Charlie wasn't listening. Let me see that, he exclaimed. Tom handed Charlie the bookmark and the receipt and let him see for himself. You found it, Tom! The proof we've been looking for! Sarge's food was the worst, but Tom and Charlie didn't care, although for different reasons. For Charlie, he had no intention of eating it. His sustenance now was the pure excitement of finally establishing what he believed to be an undeniable connection between Sam and Ms. Lewis. For Tom, he had no taste buds left, not since a hot sauce party in the 11th grade, so it was flat-out primal hunger. As he stuffed a cheeseburger in his face and slurped a Dr. Pepper, he listened to Charlie elucidate on the finer points of their sleuthing. Don't you see, Tom? This solution is more bulletproof than anything we could have ever hoped for. And I have you to thank for it. Sure, I could have identified Miss Lewis as the girl in the pickup, but my perceptions could always be challenged. The anagram, on the other hand, can't, because it doesn't rely on perceptions, mine nor anyone else's. It defies coincidence. It had to be engineered. The odds of it happening randomly are as unlikely as... Tom finished his sentence. You running into Sam in the middle of nowhere. Exactly. I don't know, Charlie. I admit it's pretty weird, but... Tom slurped his soda. It's more than weird, Tom. It's proof. And with that said, the moment of truth is upon us. It's time to present Mrs. Gardner with the fruits of our detective work. As they walked out to the truck, they were at odds. What difference does a half hour make, Charlie? What's the rush? You floor me, Tom. We just discovered the most damning proof that Dell and Sam are the same person, and all you can think about is dessert. I would have thought we'd be fully united on this, racing out of there, not just because of the shitty food, but because of what a crowning achievement this is. It's why we drove 500 miles, remember? But did you see those pies? Tom asked. Oh my God, never mind. All I know is I'm ready to pay Mrs. Gardner a visit, finally get some real answers and put this whole nightmare to rest. I realize it could be dangerous. We don't fully have a grip on who we're dealing with, but somehow my instincts tell me Gardner has a really good reason to lie about Sam. That deep down there's not an ounce of malice or a violent bone in her body. I felt that pretty much from the start. Granted, there could be other players behind the scenes, but we have to look at Sam. Ask ourselves, has she been mistreated in any way? Not by any measure I can think of. No, Tom, this is our moment of truth, and I can feel it with every heartbeat and every breath. True. I guess we could get dessert later. 10 minutes later, Tom pulled up in front of 376 Deerholm Street. It was twilight, and there was a soft glow coming from several of the upper-story windows. The bottom floor was dark, but a porch ceiling fixture dimly lit the veranda. The air was dry, and crickets chirped noisily as Tom and Charlie got out and walked up to the front door. Charlie rang the bell. You have the bookmark? Tom asked. In my pocket, Charlie said. They heard clamoring as someone inside approached. At once the door swung open. It was Mrs. Gardner. She was dressed as though she was going out and appeared to be in a frenzied state. When she saw who it was, her face dropped.
You again? And why did you bring the mailman?
Mrs. Gardner, I need to speak with you, Charlie said firmly.
I'm sorry, I'm on my way out, so...
Charlie cut her off. I'm here to see Leslie Weld. She had the door halfway closed when the name stopped her in her tracks. She turned her head slightly, as if someone might be behind her. After thinking for a moment, she said,
Okay, come in.
She held the door as Charlie and Tom entered the house. After inviting them into the parlor, she said, Wait here. Then she disappeared into the interior of the house. Charlie and Tom looked at each other, shrugged, and waited. It was a classic old Victorian sitting room with century-old chestnut wainscot, trim, doors, and floors. Their eyes took in the majesty of the room. The wood had an aged, deep red hue, and although scratched and chipped in many places, the blemishes were mostly superficial. Never painted, with only the original shellac protecting it, it was ideally suited to restoration. The upper walls looked to be of the original plaster and were covered with 30s-style print wallpaper. The main chandelier was an authentic antique, and the wall switches were the pearl-inlaid push-button style. It was a restorer's dream house. Beautiful craftsmanship, eh, Charlie? Just like I remember Grandpa's house, Charlie said. Tom added, It even has that same smell. If I lived here, I'd be all over this woodwork. Charlie knelt down to point out an interesting detail on a pocket door when Agnes returned. She was now holding a double-barreled shotgun and pointing it directly at them. Tom saw it first. Charlie? Charlie looked up.
What the? Now who the hell are you? The woman inquired.
Tom nudged Charlie and whispered, I got a bad feeling both of us may be all over the woodwork. Charlie's voice was dry. I'm Charlie Hudson. This is my brother Tom. Hi, Tom said. Nice place you got here. Charlie shot him a menacing look and took a deep breath. Might as well cut to the chase.
Good idea, she said.
Charlie continued. 22 years ago, I met Sam in a park in Denver. I brought her food on the way to my piano lessons. I mean you or her no harm. I just wanted to see her again, make sure she was okay. Charlie pulled the bookmark from his pocket and offered it to her. The woman paused, suspicious at first, then took it from him and silently examined it. From her expression, he could see it had an impact. She looked up and then leaned the gun against the wall. Charlie paused, then asked, Can I see Sam? Behind Mrs. Gardner, from around the corner, Sam entered the parlor. There she was, the same young woman he had seen in the pickup, only days prior. And even more incredibly, the same little girl he knew 22 years before. It hardly seemed possible, but it was her, dimple and all, in the same room as Charlie. Sam seemed equally consumed by disbelief, because she then asked Charlie, You're the boy who brought me food? Who played the piano? Charlie could only nod. She walked over to Charlie and, standing close, scrutinized his face. At once her face brightened and she smiled. Yes, I remember you, she said softly. You made him open the windows for me, so I could hear the music. It was a surreal moment, not only for Charlie, but everyone in the room. Charlie's arms were at his side when Sam embraced him, lightly resting her head on his shoulder. Charlie reciprocated her embrace, at first tentatively, as though she were a ghost, and then, upon feeling her warmth, tightly and with a great sense of joy. He looked up at Mrs. Gardner and mouthed the words, Thank you. Mrs. Gardner smiled. After a moment, Sam released her embrace and stepped back. I'm sorry, but I really have to go now. You can go on without me, Sam. I'll catch up, Mrs. Gardner said. Okay, said Sam. She smiled at Charlie and Tom and left the room. After Sam left the room, Mrs. Gardner began to speak. Charlie cut her off. You have nothing to explain, Mrs. Gardner. None of this will ever leave this room. You have my word. I trust you, but I want to explain. I need to explain.
If I don't, your imaginations will get the best of you, and you'll have second thoughts. I can't let you go without knowing the whole story. Can I get either of you anything while we talk?"
"Do you have any pie?" Tom asked. He felt Charlie's elbow.
"I'm sorry, I don't have any, but I can put some tea on."
"That would be great," Charlie said. They all went into the kitchen, and while Charlie and Tom sat at a marble-topped island and drank tea, Mrs. Gardner told her story.
"My late husband, Jim Weld, was Sam's father. He and Sam's mother, Victoria, were both alcoholics. When Sam was young, Jim and Victoria were able to keep their weakness for booze in check. But over time, their addictions grew. By the time Sam was 5, multiple child neglect charges had been filed against them, and eventually, social services was forced to step in. It started a messy divorce, where a court awarded Victoria custody of Sam, with no visitation rights for Jim. It was extremely hard on Jim, so he tried to clean up his act to gain custody of Sam. Meanwhile, Victoria became hooked on even stronger drugs, and eventually started prostituting herself as a way of supporting her habit. When Jim became aware of this, it only deepened his resolve to win back Sam, not just for custody, but to save her life, as he dearly loved her. I met Jim at Alcoholics Anonymous, and after a brief courtship, we married. Jim made me aware of the Sam debacle, and I was committed to helping him gain custody, believing, as a couple, we were more likely to win the favor of a judge. But soon after our marriage, Jim was killed in a car accident. It was then up to me to carry on Jim's mission. Unfortunately, without him, I had no standing, so I had to take matters into my own hands. When I learned of a scheme Victoria had to sell Sam, I was, of course, shocked, but at the same time knew it was a great opportunity. Using money left to me by Jim and cashing in a retirement account, I was able to outbid the other prospective buyers. But for Sam's peace of mind, Victoria and I needed a story. We told Sam that I was a friend who would be her nanny for a few months while Victoria underwent an operation. Sam and I then left. The following day, Victoria reported her missing. For the next 2 years, Sam and I holed up in Rapid City in a small rooming house where I homeschooled her and cared for her. When she was 11, I finally realized I had to tell her everything. At first, it was very hard on her, but gradually, over time, she's been able to come to terms with it. When Sam was 17, we found this place in Chadron, and having a permanent residence has been a blessing for both of us.
"What happened to Victoria?" Tom asked.
"She died when Sam was 10. The official cause of death was suicide, from a drug overdose, but knowing the kind of people she was dealing with, I'm not sure I buy it."
"And when did you change Sam's name?" Charlie asked.
"It was a couple of days after I told her the truth. We talked through several possibilities and then settled on Del Lewis. Lewis was my mother's maiden name, and Del was the name of my sister who died at birth."
Charlie was stunned.
"Wait, what?
"You mean you named her Del Lewis, not knowing it was an anagram of Leslie Weld?"
"What's an anagram?"
Mrs. Gardner asked. Charlie looked at Tom, stunned, and Tom just smiled and shrugged. Mrs. Gardner checked her watch.
"Oh dear, I need to get on the road."
"Where are you headed?" Charlie asked.
"Oklahoma."
"Oklahoma?" Charlie asked.
"Yeah, can't miss Sam's opening night. You'll have to excuse me."
Tom and Charlie looked at each other, baffled at first, and then with sudden understanding. "Can we tag along?" asked Charlie.
"Sure, we can all go over together if you want," said Mrs. Gardner.
Tom pulled 2 red stubs from his shirt pocket. "I even have tickets." They followed Mrs. Gardner out the door and down the steps as she said,
"Just a warning, you might want to lock your car up. Just heard wind of somebody running around the neighborhood breaking into people's cars."
Charlie and Tom traded sideways glances. For a high school in the sticks, it was an impressively large auditorium and completely packed by the time they got there. Mixed with a hum of parents, teachers, and siblings chatting, shrieking, and laughing was the sound of the orchestra. Some instrumentalists tuned while others made desperate last-ditch efforts to learn passages they were slated to play during the show. Clarinets squeaked, trumpets cracked, and random mangled themes rang out as Charlie, Tom, and Mrs. Gardner took 3 of the last remaining seats. Moments later, the house lights dimmed, the orchestra and roar of the crowd subsided, and the music director appeared. It was Sam. She bowed, the audience broke into applause, and she took her seat at the piano. Charlie was verklempt as he prepared to watch the most awful production of Oklahoma on the most glorious day of his life. After the show, Charlie, Tom, and Mrs. Gardner waited amongst a throng of adults and children in the crowded lobby of the auditorium, all waiting to meet the performers. Several people in the crowd approached Mrs. Gardner, effusively praising Sam's brilliance and her contribution to the production. He saw the white-haired woman from the flower shop and ducked behind an actor with a straw hat. She obviously knew Mrs. Gardner, because from where he stood, he could hear her ask how Dell's hip was. The crowd began to grow as more and more performers came out of their dressing rooms to meet their friends and families. All at once, a familiar face emerged from the horde to get Charlie's attention. It was the manager of the motel.
"So glad you came to see the show, Mr. Houston."
Hudson.
"Hudson, did you see Peggy?"
she asked proudly. He looked down to see the cute little redhead holding her mother's hand. Charlie knelt down.
"Did I see Peggy? I couldn't take my eyes off of her. You stole the show," he added.
They fist-bumped and she giggled. Charlie felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Sam. When he stood up to face her, he almost couldn't believe it. In a matter of hours, his whole life had been turned around.
"I did the best I could," she said apologetically.
"It was every bit as fantastic as my high school production," Charlie said. Sam laughed. "And by the way, you're an amazing pianist." Charlie was not lying. Sam's pianistic prowess was obvious, even to an uneducated ear, and it appeared that, if she wanted, she could have a future well beyond that of a high school music teacher in Chadron.
"Thank you, but that's all Aggie," Sam said. "She went into Hawk giving me lessons and hiring tutors. That's why the house looks the way it does."
"Don't apologize. You have a beautiful house. With a little work, it could be amazing." Charlie felt an arm land on his shoulder, suddenly aware that Tom was directly behind him. "And here's the guy who can do it for you," said Tom.
"Is that so?"
asked Sam. Mrs. Gardner entered the conversation. "What you gabbing about?"
"We're talking about the house, Aggie."
"Oh, I got that all figured out," Mrs. Gardner said. "Been talking to a contractor from Crawford about doing some work this winter. They want to start with the parlor. Gonna rip out the old wainscot and plaster, sheetrock over the whole thing. Then get new switches, put up some track lighting."
"Oh, no,"
Charlie said.
"You can't do that."
"Why not?" Mrs. Gardner asked.
"'Cause Charlie's gonna renovate it for us," Sam said.
"Well, I guess there's no harm in considering it," Mrs. Gardner replied. "I'm also thinking about picking up a little console piano for Sam. The one she's been playing is in pretty bad shape." "I can probably help you out there also," Charlie said, his eyes still on Sam. Tom smiled, patting Charlie on the back.
"Well, Sam, we ought to get to the cast party before all the shrimp is gone," Mrs. Gardner said.
Peggy shouted,
"Or the lemon meringue pie!"
Tom shot Charlie a tortured look as the 4 of them hugged and said their goodbyes. Before leaving, Sam added, "I hope to see you all again soon." Then she looked directly at Charlie. In addition to her dimple, there was now an intriguing glint in her eye. Tom elbowed Charlie for some reason. By 7 a.m., Charlie and Tom were back on the road to Denver. This time, Tom drove. "So are you or aren't you?" Tom asked as he merged onto the interstate. "Am I or am I what?" Charlie asked absently. He had the window down and was enjoying the crisp morning air. "You know what I'm talking about. New York. Are you going back?" "Not right away. I got the job in Chadron to do first," Charlie said. "You take that job, you're never going back." "I don't know. You never know how things might turn out." "I'm putting my money on that twinkle in her eye." Charlie didn't say anything. He hoped Tom was right, but was done living on hopes. He was pretty damn fond of the present right now. For now, he was going to breathe in the cool air and enjoy the stark beauty of the sandhills as they stretched to the horizon. The end.